And may I just ask for a moment or two of silence before we get started. And I go to the core of myself. That which is organic and unpolluted. Almost like the Saraswati River. We know it's there, underground, but how to access it. And yet, the confidence that we shall. Om Shanti. So, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to each of you. All of you, as I was listening, are philosophers and yogis, are travelers on the path, and no doubt have the pure intention to keep growing yourself and being the inspiration for others, either to commence their growth or to elaborate. And so we are all spiritual friends, in a sense, connected by vibrations. And it's an ancient idea that the purity of the holy man and woman in whatever tradition, as well as serving their personal journey, that it also helped support the world to some extent. But ultimately, it wasn't sufficient to stop the decline. And so now, even while in other faith traditions, they bemoan the fact that people are not becoming priests anymore. People are not becoming nuns. In other words, so many less vocations than what there had been even whilst I was growing up. And so in a strange kind of a way, here are all of us, the majority of whom no doubt live in the world and go about raising their families, following their occupations or their professions. And so in a kind of a way, we are the vocations of this time. And that without any fanfare or taking vows, we have made an internal commitment, a covenant even, with God to assist not only in supporting the world, but in transforming it. And I recall in my very early days of involvement with the Brahma Kumaris, which actually started in 76, not 74, but 76, when I heard the teachings, and this was directly from the Supreme Teacher, and it touched my heart, and it was a request. It wasn't a demand. or an order. And we were being addressed as children. Children. In this incarnation, and I would have been in my 20s, somebody else could have been in their 50s, somebody else could have been a teenager. In this incarnation, and for whatever time of it is left, help me with your purity. And it was something that really, really resonated with me, because before that, I might have seen it as just something that I would do perhaps personally to aid my own journey, but that it was actually something that conjoined with others would become a force for goodness, for transformation, not only of whatever had accumulated or accrued that was less than pure within my own self, but that it even extended to the possibility of transforming nature itself, transforming the whole world. It touched me, but did I grasp it entirely at that moment in time? Of course not. Of course not. You know, I even remember before coming to the Brahma Kumaris, and I would call myself, I suppose, in retrospect, I would have said that I was a seeker, that I was definitely a pilgrim, and that I was looking for something. Not quite sure what it was, but the confidence that I would recognize it when I found it. And one of the things within that, strangely enough, was the idea of celibacy. I wasn't necessarily thinking of it for my own self, but there was a knowing that if I were to become the pupil of a teacher, and of course, unknowingly, I assumed that any teacher would be male. That was until I arrived at the door of the Brahma Kumaris. But I remember I was in Africa, and there was a very wise man, and he had a different spin on aspects of the Bible, which I really related to. And so I was very happy to be in his company and to learn from him, until I discovered that although this man was much older than I was, maybe he might have been in his 50s. He seemed old to me at that time. And his wife had died, but he was now about to get married to someone who was about 20 years old, one of his followers. And it somehow didn't connect for me that he was teaching something, and yet he was under the influence of someone else, or that he was dependent. Because one thing I felt that I knew, that in my seeking, that I would get to a point where there was no longer a dependency for my joy or for my pleasure or my escape through either, you know, it could have been alcohol, it could have been drugs, it could have been an intimate relationship. And so I knew the answer wasn't in any of those things. I foresaw, I now understand how I foresaw that there would be a point in time, and I thought all yogis had this facility. I hadn't met the Brahma Kumaris yet, but what I understood to be yogis, that they were completely independent from others, and that their bliss and their joy came from their inner life, that it was sourced like the Saraswati River from deep, deep inside. And yet it would then become apparent from the way they conducted themselves in the world that they were being fed by that purest and highest source. So that's just a little anecdote of leading up to coming to the Brahma Kumaris. When I was thinking about this, was it the value of purity, meaning the worth of purity, or purity as a value? And I was just ruminating on the difference between values and virtues, because whether in terms of religion or cultures, whatever else, there can be some agreed values, universal values. But then again, something that one religion gives value to, another religion may not, you know. And so values at one level seem to me, and even as I was listening to all of you speaking, and you were sharing very profound things, and I wonder if the value, which could just be inspirational, you know, this country is based supposedly on values, as is any of your countries. And so if we were living those values, would there be any question of homelessness? Would there be any question of jails, of a justice system? Of course not. And so the challenge is to turn the values into virtues. In other words, that I'm living them. So it's a little bit like saying, you know, here's an apple, and I can give you all of the nutritional value of that apple and how it's going to support your health or whatever. And then I throw it away. If I don't ingest it and digest it, then just talking about it is not going to give me the benefit of it. And so this question that was posed, is it the quality of purity? Is it there anyway? Or do I have to learn it, relearn it, imbibe it? And I think there's a case for both things. But ultimately, if we're taking it to its highest possible, you know, denominator, then it is not something I can do by myself. I feel another energy is needed. And now, not for the sake of being the devil's advocate, but I just want to look at this in a little bit of a different way. And we are extolling the value of purity. And most of you that I see are already students, however new or however long, with the Brahma Kumaris. And so one of the very first things that you would have learned, and you learned it so well that you've never forgotten it, And that is the original qualities of the soul. And very simply, they are put in terms of 5 things. And it's the same for every human soul. And that's peace, purity, love, bliss, and you can say knowledge, or you can say truth, or you can say wisdom. And I would like to challenge that a little bit and suggest that purity is not a stand-alone quality. Rather, it's a descriptor of the highest form of all the other qualities. In other words, pure peace. What kind of peace do I want? Pure peace, pure bliss, pure knowledge or pure truth, pure, what am I missing here? Love. Good heavens, how could I have missed that? What kind of love do you want? I want pure love. I don't want a mixture. And so then what would I replace purity with? What I would replace it with, and I have to say, it is something very near and dear to my heart. You know, because when you use this word purity, certainly in a Western context, it has a very moralistic connotation. And people do not hear it very well, because it almost suggests that you're impure, you know, and as we're shown, that's not any way to approach another human being, by telling them that they're not pure or that they're impure. And it just shows my arrogance and my ignorance, if that's my approach. And so I would suggest that the quality that is inherent in all souls, and people respond to this much more quickly when suggested, and that is innocence. Innocence is the original nature of the soul. And I think when you say purity, you really mean innocence. And so what is innocence? You know, it is uncorrupted. It doesn't harbor anything other than its natural state of being. And when it comes to innocence, there's a beauty, and we have so many examples in front of us. We've all seen that quality, and we rarely, even when we see our great yogis, we don't normally say, oh, they're so pure. It's not a word that I tend to use to describe them. I'll say they're so loving, they're so powerful, they're so peaceful. Even some, they're so innocent, not naive, not to be confused with naivete, but they're so innocent. And so that means, you know, there's even this idea, you have it very strongly in Hinduism, and to some extent in Christianity, where God is sometimes shown as a baby, you know, and what is more pure and what is more innocent than a baby, you know, and there's no question of impurity. And so then I would say that those were the natural qualities of the soul. But what happened? You know, what happened to that pure love, that pure peace, that pure truth? I guess, and ultimately no one's to blame, but it's just that our explorations in our wanting to, I sometimes think that it was, you know, curiosity that took me away from my origins. I wanted to see what was over there, and then of course in our journeying, we didn't know when we commenced that our journey would be long-winded and take us through lifetimes and take us through a multitude of experiences and religions and genders and everything else, only to bring us back to the starting point, you know. But some little things had to happen for me to get that thought that it's time to go back. The return journey has commenced. And what am I looking for? A guide, a true guide, a pure-hearted guide that is going to show me truthfully and simply the way to get back there again. And so this is why all of us are on the earth at the present time, because of our willingness to make that commitment, that covenant with the Supreme One, the one that's remembered as the Purifier, so that we can return and aid and help others to get there too. You know, there's a very nice story that I sometimes tell, and because I've just mentioned the purifier, the idea of the one who purifies. And this is from the Old Testament, and wherein God is referred to as the refiner and purifier of silver, right? So some ladies, you know, reading the scriptures together, they felt they needed to find out, why was this expression, this title being given to God? How would they understand that in terms of themselves? And so she went along to a silversmith, and he walked her through the process. And the process was such that the silver, along with the various impurities, were held over the heat, and not just any old heat, but intense fire. And the silversmith all the while had to keep his eye on this process that was taking place, because had he turned away, then in 1 second it would have been too hot and everything would have been destroyed, including the silver. And she wanted to know, as regards the refiner and purifier of silver, how will you know when it's ready? And the silversmith answered her very simply, and he said, that's easy. When I can see my reflection in it. And so that idea of the Supreme being with us, we are in the process. Yes, it's a process. And you understand it more as you go along, of being refined, so that we can reflect the purity and the benevolence. Because this is the thing with any of these original qualities, they automatically contain benevolence. They are by their nature givers. And of course, we've gotten ourselves in trouble by taking too much, by being greedy, by complicating things,